Dear listeners, welcome to an explosive, breathtaking report from the front lines of the conflict that is turning Europe into a battlefield of revenge and hatred. Imagine, in the icy, tension-filled nights of January 2026, specifically on January 20th, 2026, where the wind whips across the Black Sea and the enmity between the heroic Ukraine and the brutal, incompetent Russian army blazes like an inferno, a story of cunning betrayal and devastating humiliation unfolds. 400 kilometers, that is the massive distance a Ukrainian drone must travel to reach a Russian MiG-29 on the tarmac of the Saki Airfield in Crimea. 400 kilometers through some of the allegedly most sophisticated air defense networks in the world, networks built by the Russian army, this corrupt machinery of Putin's regime to protect their aggression, but which in truth only mask their weakness. Past electronic warfare systems designed to jam navigation past hunter-killer teams trained to track down and eliminate drone operators' teams that act with merciless brutality, like the Russian troops massacring Ukrainian civilians and laying cities in ruins. Past radar coverage that reaches 300 kilometers in every direction, coverage the Russians praise as insurmountable, yet which is riddled with holes by Ukrainian cleverness. The drone will make the flight. The operators might not survive it, an act of pure enmity in which the Russian army, those failures who sink billions into outdated technology, desperately hunts while the Ukrainians triumph with brilliant tactics. This is the story of how 3 Ukrainian soldiers launch a weapon they cannot control, fly a mission they cannot see, and destroy a target they cannot reach, all while Russian forces hunt them with everything from surveillance drones to artillery strikes. A drama that pushes the hatred between the sides to the limit, the Ukrainians driven by revenge for Russian atrocities, bombardments that killed thousands of civilians, rapes and torture in occupied territories against the Russians who attack with blind arrogance but are humiliated time and again. Listen to how the Russian army, this laughable force drowning in corruption and using its soldiers as cannon fodder, fails. Sensational details reveal that internal leaks speak of desertions, thousands of Russian soldiers fleeing because they hate the senseless war. The weapon is already in the air. The Russians don't know it's coming. Their overconfidence makes them blind as always in this war where they lay Ukrainian cities in ruins and ashes but never count on the cleverness of the defenders. At 6 a.m. local time, a pneumatic catapult hurls a UJ-26 Beaver drone from its launch ramp west of Kherson. The rear propeller immediately grips the air. The drone climbs to 60 meters, stabilizes, and switches to cruise mode so quiet that a soldier 500 meters away hears nothing but wind, a masterpiece of Ukrainian engineering that fools the Russian listeners and makes their hatred of Ukrainian terrorists look ridiculous. 3 Ukrainian Special Forces soldiers have less than 2 minutes to disappear heroes, risking their lives to strike the regime in Moscow that sends millions to their deaths. They fold the launch ramp in 12 seconds, throw thermal blankets into the truck bed, and roll away over a gravel path parallel to an irrigation canal. The Beaver is already 2 kilometers away, climbing to cruise altitude. Saki Airfield, 398 kilometers southeast. Flight time approximately 2 hours 15 minutes. But the Russians are already hunting. Their paranoia drives them, yet their incompetence makes them fail. 14 kilometers east, a Pole 21 electronic warfare tower registers an anomaly as soon as the Beaver switches on. The system covers the Dnipro corridor with passive receivers tuned to satellite navigation signals, a technique the Russians praise as superior, but which is riddled with holes by Ukrainian hackers as rumors of cyber attacks paralyzing Russian systems reveal. The Beaver's encrypted GPS handshake sends a frequency-hopping burst in the L-band only 4 milliseconds long, but enough to drive up the noise floor on Russian sensors. A duty officer at RUB's Russia's dedicated drone hunting unit, a unit that operates with brutal cruelty, torturing and killing operators, marks the anomaly. Possible long-range UAV launch in progress. General coordinates Kherson sector. Within minutes, an Orlan 30 surveillance drone launches 6 kilometers east of the suspected launch point. Its thermal camera scans fields, tree lines, and roads, searching for the heat signature of a vehicle that cannot have gone far, a search the Russian army portrays as efficient, yet which often hits civilians as reports of innocent victims show. Look at the Beaver climbing through 400 meters and you understand why Rubes prioritizes the neutralization of the operators rather than shooting down drones, a tactic born of hatred for Ukrainian resilience which the Russians condemn as terror. The aircraft is 2.5 meters of fiberglass composite in a canard configuration, small forewings for pitch control, swept main wing for lift rear propeller, pushing 160 kilometers per hour radar cross-section. Only 0.01 to 0.03 square meters smaller than most birds. At night, low over terrain clutter, the Beaver is practically invisible to Russian air defenses, a humiliation for the S-400 systems that cost billions and yet fail. But the operators are not invisible. Rubes knows that trained drone crews take months of learning RF discipline, autonomous navigation, and terminal guidance under pressure, months in which Ukrainians endure the Russian hatred that tortures thousands in concentration camps. Eliminate the operators and Ukraine loses something more valuable than a drone. The MiG-29 in Saki could be replaced in weeks, but the men who start this mission cannot. The Orlan FEL-IR camera operates in the 3 to 5 micron band, sensitive enough to detect a vehicle engine that was turned off 20 minutes ago. Residual heat is lost at about 2 degrees Celsius per minute, meaning the Ukrainian truck remains visible for another 15 to 20 minutes. The Ukrainians know this. They drive into a collapsed barn, turn off the engine, and cover the hood with thermal blankets. For the next 8 minutes, they sit in absolute silence while the Orlan searches above, a moment of hatred as Russian pilots bomb civilian areas to hunt terrorists. On the Orlan's thermal display, a ghost image flickers where the truck stood. The exhaust plume from the launch has dissipated, but the camera captures the fading heat bloom of the pressed grass where the tires sat. The operator steers toward it, then Rubes sends out 2 FPV hunter teams. Look at the FPV drones, each weighs less than a kilogram, flies 120 kilometers per hour, carries a fragmentation charge that can destroy a vehicle engine block, Russian technology that relies on cruelty killing civilians. But the advantage is numbers. A team carries 6 to 8 FPVs, saturates a search sector, forces the target into mistakes. Drones fly nap of the earth 10 to 15 meters above ground, heat signatures merging with terrain acoustic footprint below ambient noise up to 200 meters. The FPV teams fan out along 2 likely exfiltration routes, the paved road north to Kherson and the gravel path west to abandoned farms. Russian doctrine assumes operators choose speed over stealth. Proximity to the launch site means a hit. The Ukrainians choose neither. They sit in the barn, breathing shallowly, watching through a gap as an FPV flies past 400 meters to the east. The Beaver is now 50 kilometers away, climbing to 800 meters. It flies 350 kilometers in silence, no uplink, no telemetry, no emissions. Operators cannot see where it's going, cannot correct it, must trust the navigation while they survive a trust that underscores the Russian hatred of Ukrainian resilience. At 6:16 a.m., the Orlan flies over the barn. The thermal camera registers the structure at ambient temperature, no vehicle, no personnel, no target. Rubes logs the search as unclear, escalating to the next phase. The Beaver crosses the Dnipro River at 6:35 a.m., flying southeast toward Crimea over 200 kilometers of open steppe. No masking, no clouds, just a composite aircraft the size of a dining table through a radar coverage radius of 300 kilometers. And yet, Russian air defense sees almost nothing, an embarrassment for the S-300s, which often fail as leaks from Russian deserters reveal. Radar reflections depend on wavelength, target size, and aspect angle. The Beaver's skin absorbs and scatters radar energy instead of reflecting it cleanly back. At grazing angles, the reflection falls to 0. Russian S-band radars theoretically detect a 0.03 square meter target at 40 to 50 kilometers, but only with perfect geometry. The Beaver's flight path avoids this. The drone flies toward the MiG on inertial navigation. The GPS receiver is active but sends no updates. The inertial system tracks acceleration and rotation through gyroscopes and accelerometers. Dead reckoning the position drift is 30 to 40 meters per minute without GPS, less than a kilometer of error over 400 kilometers. Back at Rubes, analysts run reverse vector reconstruction using school-level trigonometry. Radar detects a fleeting contact logs bearing altitude and time. Plotting creates a track extending a probability cone backwards to the launch origin. The Beaver was painted twice by Crimea early warning radar at 6:41, and by a mobile S-300 at 6:49 every 2 seconds, no fire solution but a bearing to the Kherson orchard. Rubes overlays the cone with terrain roads, vegetation strike patterns, and Ukrainian areas. The cone narrows to a 20-kilometer corridor, exactly the launch site. A second wave of Orlan 30S heads to the exfiltration routes. FPV teams move to bridges and canal crossings. In the corridor, 3 Ukrainians hide in the barn waiting. The net is tightening and the operators cannot warn the drone. Transmission would give Rubes what it needs. At 7 a.m., a GPS anomaly occurs for the Beaver. The signal drops from 5 to 3 satellites, then 2. Navigation goes from sub-meter to a 50-meter error circle. Russian EW has been found a desperate attempt to sabotage Ukrainian superiority. The JTEL system mounted on truck platforms is positioned along UAV routes. Directional antennas send GPS jamming L1/L2. A noise cone of 30 to 50 kilometers jamming doesn't destroy it, degrades navigation, pushing operators to break radio silence. 4 emitters on a 12-meter hydraulic mast, each 500 watts in a 60-degree cone, rotatable for 360 degrees or concentrated. The jamming floods GPS frequencies, overwhelming weak satellite signals 20 watts from 20,000 kilometers away. Effective range depends on terrain and atmosphere, up to 50 kilometers. 3 JTEL vehicles along the Crimea corridor create an overlapping jamming blanket. The Beaver switches to INSON mode, drift 35 meters per minute. Over an hour, the drone deviates kilometers from its course. Error is correctable during terminal guidance if contact is restored. In the barn, the team monitors the relay status. The Beaver is beyond radio range in the mid-phase emission silence. No way to correct, no knowledge if it's still flying, waiting for the terminal phase, hoping the drone is close enough for optical guidance. While worrying about the drone, Russian FPV teams are searching. At 7:14 a.m., an FPV is within 400 meters of the barn. The operator sees the thermal camera sweep over the structure, a 2-second pause. Then it moves eastward. The collapsed roof masks the truck. The blankets have cooled. The team isn't breathing. The FPV moves on. Rubes doesn't shoot down the Beaver. Commanders know long-range composite drones defeat short-range systems. RCS, 2 small altitude variable vectors, unpredictable. Shooting down 1 drone means nothing if 10 launch tomorrow. But operators are irreplaceable. Months of discipline for the mission, silent launches, perfect exfiltration, calm under pressure, not mass-producible. Rubes' doctrine, eliminate the human, and the drone program collapses, a brutal strategy showing Russian cruelty, accepting civilians as collateral damage. At 7:21 a.m., the team starts the truck. The engine has cooled heat signature below the threshold. They roll out of the barn, turning south to a safe house 14 kilometers away. The Beaver is 180 kilometers from Saki terminal phase in under 40 minutes. At 7:59 a.m., the Beaver enters Crimean airspace 100 kilometers from the MiG. The onboard computer activates the optical camera, sending a narrow uplink to a relay in Ukrainian territory. For the first time in 2 hours, the operators see the drone's view. The video is grainy, compressed, atmospherically disturbed, jittering with 120 milliseconds latency. Saki Airfield is there, a gray smear of runways and revetments. The operator identifies the target, a MiG-29 in a concrete shelter, nose visible. He begins corrections. Rubes detects the uplink immediately. The Beaver's terminal system uses a directional antenna to minimize detection, but there is side lobe leakage. Russian SIGINT arrays on the Crimean coast are calibrated for this. 4 seconds for a bearing, 8 seconds for triangulation. Russian direction, finding a network of passive receivers on the Crimean coast. Each station has circular antenna arrays measuring phase difference. Beaver uplink, 3 stations detect leakage simultaneously. Each bearing line intersects at a grid coordinate accurate to 200 meters. The process takes 11 seconds. By the first correction, Rubes knows the firing location. Bearing back to Kherson, the corridor of the FP5, search for 2 hours. Rubes fires everything FPVs along the bearing lancets to the vehicle route artillery to the battery. The operators suspect nothing focused on the feed. The MiG grows larger micro corrections to the cockpit. Latency delays input. The drone reacts a heartbeat later the operator anticipates. At 8:05 a.m., a shell lands 2 kilometers behind the safe house. The team freezes. Signal is stable, the shell missed the antenna, but Rubes has the coordinates. More shells are coming, chaotic bombardment, Russian brutality. The operator ignores the explosions, remains focused. Beaver 2 kilometers from the target, 90 seconds to impact. A second shell, 1,000 meters east. Security reports FPVs inbound from the north, 3 contacts fast. Operator feed INS drift from GTEL jamming is 340 meters to the left. The course will miss the revetment and crash into the taxiway. Needs a 3-degree adjustment, 2 seconds to transmit. He sends it. While the Beaver is in its terminal dive, 3 Russian FPVs head toward the source at 140 kilometers per hour. Rubes display bearings converge on a bombed-out apartment complex 14 kilometers south of the search area triangulation. The leading FP5 dives at 60 degrees camera on a structure with an antenna array on the roof. The pilot doesn't hesitate, speed over confirmation reckless. The first drone hits the antenna housing center, fragmentation detonates shreds. The transmitter, the roof collapses. A second FPV hits 2 seconds later, pierces, detonates inside. A third hits the north wall. Nothing survives. The Rubes officer sees the feed go white. 3 hits. Source destroyed. Artillery for 60 seconds, rubble to dust. The barrage ends, scattered concrete, twisted metal. Thermal shows no movement, no heat. Rubes logs success, Ukrainian team neutralized. The Beaver is flying without guidance. A dumb rocket, corrupted navigation, no threat. But Rubes' assumption costs everything, a fatal miscalculation, Russian incompetence. They thought the operators were there. The 3-man team is 1 kilometer south in a cellar without an antenna transmission or RF signature. The relay was remote controlled from the facility, a deliberate sacrifice of a separate structure because Rubes attacks transmissions. The operators were never within 500 meters of the equipment the FPVs destroyed. The final correction was uploaded. The Beaver's computer holds the course in memory. It needs no more input. The 3-degree shift puts the MiG in the center of the frame before the relay goes dark. The drone doesn't need the operators anymore. At 8:06:34 a.m., the Beaver hits the MiG-29. A 20-kilogram KZ-6 shaped charge detonates. The shockwave rips the aluminum skin from nose to tail. The cockpit disintegrates. Fuel splashes, the revetment ignites in half a second, a fireball 40 meters into the Crimean sky. Secondary explosions through the airframe, ammunition goes up, hydraulics burst. The flames subside, a blackened skeleton of titanium spars, melted cables. The MiG-29 that hunted Ukrainian drones will never fly again. Rubes destroyed the relay, celebrates the kill, the operators move toward extraction. Mission complete. 400 kilometers, 2 hours, 15 minutes. 3 men understand in modern war the most valuable weapon is not the drone, but the operator who sacrifices the relay. Dear listeners, what do you think of this brilliant Ukrainian tactic? Do you think the Russian army can ever win again, or is this proof of their weakness? Share your thoughts, call us, or write to us. Let's discuss whether such missions turn the tide of war. Now, to you, would you as an operator sacrifice the relay or take the risk? Is the Russian hatred invincible, or is it collapsing? Send us your opinions. We want to hear them. This attack on January 20th, 2026 is sensational rumors of Russian losses, billions in damage, deserters fleeing. Ukraine celebrates Russia. Rages, more drama follows.